This is the story of Orrin Calloway and his wife Margot Calloway. They had built something that looked from the outside like a life well chosen. Orrin was the kind of man who kept promises quietly, who showed up without being asked, who loved in the way that practical people love, through presence, through constancy, through the small, unglamorous acts of staying. Margot had married him knowing this, and for years it had been enough. But there was a fault line running through the center of their family that neither of them had fully named. Orrin's parents, Edmund and Lorraine Calloway, had never entirely accepted Cale, the boy Orrin adopted at 3 years old, as their own blood. They had been civil. They had been present at birthdays. They had given gifts wrapped in the right paper. But civility, Orrin would come to understand, is not the same as love, and presence without warmth is its own form of absence. The story that follows is not about a dramatic unraveling. It is about the slow, accumulating weight of a wound that one man kept insisting wasn't there, until the afternoon he drove up a familiar gravel driveway with his 9-year-old son asleep in the back seat, and found a piece of paper taped to a door that made denial impossible. The drive from Cedar Falls to his parents' house in Millhaven was 2 hours and 14 minutes, and Orrin had made it so many times that his hands knew the turns before his mind did. Cale had fallen asleep somewhere around the county line, his head tipped sideways against the window, mouth slightly open, one earbud still in. He was 9 now, lanky in the way boys get before they know what to do with themselves, all knees and elbows and sudden opinions. He'd been asking about the visit for 2 days. Will Grandpa show me the workshop? Can we stay for dinner? Does Grandma still make that bread? Orrin had said yes to all of it, because he believed the answer was yes. Or he wanted to believe it. There was a difference, and he was not always careful about which side of it he stood on. Margot hadn't come. She'd said it was because of work, a Saturday consultation she couldn't reschedule, and Orrin had nodded and said he understood, and both of them had let it sit there without looking at it too closely. The truth was that Margot had stopped coming to Millhaven about a year ago, not with an announcement, not with an argument. She had simply begun having reasons. And Orrin, who was the kind of man who did not like to force confrontations with the people he loved, had begun to accept the reasons the way you accept weather. His parents' house was a white colonial on Hester Road, the kind of house that looked the same in every season, because Edmund kept the gutters clean and the paint fresh and the driveway raked. The rain grew things along the south fence, tomatoes in summer, mums in fall, and there was always a quality of deliberate order about the property that Orrin had grown up finding comforting, and now sometimes found slightly suffocating. He pulled in just before 2 o'clock. Kel stirred but didn't wake, so Orrin sat for a moment in the idling car, looking at the front door from 40 feet away. There was something on it. White rectangle, taped. He told himself it was probably a note for a delivery driver. A package reroute notice. Something mundane. He got off the car and walked up the 3 front steps and read it. The handwriting was his mother's. He recognized it the way you recognize a voice in a dark room without having to see the face. The letters were neat, slightly right-leaning, the way she'd always written grocery lists and birthday cards and the notes she used to leave in his childhood lunchbox. Real grandkids only. Don't knock. He stood there for a long moment. The afternoon was warm, a mid-September warmth that still held the memory of summer. Somewhere down the road a lawnmower ran. He could hear it. He focused on it. Then he heard Cale's door open behind him. "Dad, are we here?" Orrin turned. His son was standing on the passenger side of the car, squinting in the sunlight, hair creased from the window, still half asleep, still innocent of the last 60 seconds. "Yeah," Orrin said. His voice came out even. He didn't know how. "We're here." He stepped to the right, just enough to block the door with his body. A casual shift. He was not thinking about it consciously. Some part of him moved on instinct. "Can I ring the bell?" "Not yet. Give me a second." He walked back to the car, keeping his body angled. "Come sit with me for a minute." Cale gave him the particular look that 9-year-olds give their parents when something feels slightly off, but they don't know what, a look of curious patience, slightly wary. He climbed back into the passenger seat. Aaron got in beside him and closed the door and sat there with both hands in his lap. Is something wrong? No, Aaron said. Then, I'm just thinking. Through the windshield, the white rectangle was visible on the door, too small to read from this distance. Cale couldn't read it. Aaron knew that, but he felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with what came next. Not just the next hour, but what this meant about every family dinner and every Christmas and every easy lie he had told himself about the quality of his parents' affection for his son. He started the car. Where are we going? Cale asked. Somewhere better, Aaron said. And then, quietly, almost to himself, I need to make some phone calls. He drove to the park on Millhaven's east side, a wide, undramatic stretch of lawn with a few picnic tables and a gravel path around a pond. Cal took it in stride, the way children accept sudden changes of plan when the adult in charge seems calm. He found a stick within 30 seconds of getting out of the car and began dragging it along the path, narrating something under his breath that Aaron didn't try to follow. Aaron sat at a picnic table and called Margot. She answered on the third ring, and he could hear the particular quality of her office quiet behind her, the kind of stillness that meant she'd stepped away from something. How's the drive? She asked. We're not inside. He paused. There was a note on the door. A beat. What kind of note? He told her. He read it aloud, his voice staying flat, descriptive, the way he sometimes had to be when something was too large to hold with inflection. There was a silence on her end that lasted long enough for him to watch Cale crouch down to look at something in the gravel. Aaron, she finally said, I know. What are you going to do? This was the question, and he didn't have the answer yet, not the full answer. He had fragments. He said, I'm going to call Aunt Delia and Uncle Pierce and the Hartleys. That's your whole extended family. I know. You're going to, what? Organize something? Sunday dinner at the pavilion. I'll get it catered. He paused. I'm going to show them the note. Another silence. He heard her exhale, not sharply, but with something in it. Oh, wait. Are you sure that's the right move? I don't know if it's the right move. I know it's the one I have. Your parents will be my parents, he said. Put a note on their door telling my son he wasn't welcome. I'm not currently focused on what they'll be. He said it without heat, which he knew was more unsettling to Margot than anger would have been. She knew him well enough to understand that the steady voice meant something had resolved in him. Not rage, resolve. I'll drive up Sunday, she said. I'll be there. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He watched Cale stand back up, examine whatever he'd found, a pebble, a bottle cap, pocket it, and move on. There was something in the way his son moved through the world, with that easy, unself-conscious curiosity that always made something settle in Oren's chest. He had chosen this child. He had stood in a room with fluorescent lighting and signed papers and said, "This is my son," in front of strangers. And he had meant it entirely, had meant it more than almost anything he had ever signed or said. Margot, he said, yeah? Did you know? About how they felt? Before today, I mean. Did you know more than you told me? The silence this time was different. More careful. I had feelings, she said. What does that mean? It means I noticed things I didn't want to name because I didn't know what you'd do with it. And I was. She stopped. I was protecting the version of things that kept everything moving. He sat with that. A crow landed on the table across from him and regarded him with flat indifference before flying off. That's honest, he finally said. I'm trying to be. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'll call you tonight. After he hung up, he sat for another few minutes while Cale circled the pond, still dragging the stick, still narrating. The afternoon light was doing the thing it does in September, going slightly gold, slightly elegiac, turning everything it touches into a version of itself that seems more significant than it is. He thought about calling his parents. He thought about it, and then he thought about the handwriting, the neat right-leaning letters, and he put his phone in his pocket. Then he looked up, and something came over his face. A strange, brief distance, like a man who has just become aware of being watched. He glanced sideways, as if towards some invisible presence just outside the frame of things. "I don't know," he said quietly, almost to no one. "Maybe, like this story, or subscribe, or something." Kale looked up from the pond's edge. "What?" Oren blinked. The expression passed. "Nothing," he said, "talking to myself." Kale gave him the look again, the slightly wary patience, then went back to the water. Oren folded his hands on the picnic table and began, mentally, to build a guest list. Sunday came with the brisk clarity that early October sometimes offers. Sharp air, thin clouds, the kind of day that makes everything feel slightly more consequential than it is. The pavilion at Riverside Park was not large, but it was sufficient for the 14 people Oren had called. He had framed it simply, without theatrics. Family gathering. "I need to share something. Please come if you can." Most of them had come, his Aunt Delia, his mother's sister, and her husband Pierce. His cousin Theo and Theo's wife, Nadia, the Hartleys, his father's old friends who had been folded into family by decades of proximity. His cousin from Lorraine's side, a woman named Bet who drove 2 hours and brought deviled eggs without being asked, and Edmund and Lorraine themselves. He had called them. He had said, "There's a family gathering Sunday. I'd like you to be there." His mother had paused and then said, in the careful voice of someone who is unsure what is known, "Of course, Oren." His father had said nothing audible in the background. Margot was there, standing near the far corner of the pavilion with a cup of coffee, dressed in a dark green sweater, watching the arrivals with the attentive quiet that was one of the things Oren had loved about her first. Her ability to be present in a room without demanding it notice her. Kyle was with Theo's kids. 3 of them, ranged around a picnic table at a slight distance, doing something complicated with sticks and stones that had the structured seriousness of invented games. He did not know why he was there. Oren had simply said, "Grandma and Grandpa will be there," and left it at that. When Edmund and Lorraine arrived, Oren watched his son look up and give a small wave. Lorraine gave a thin smile. Edmund's eyes moved to Oren and stayed there. Oren waited until the food had been distributed and the conversations had settled, until the gathering had the texture of an ordinary Sunday in the family. And then he stood. He did not speak loudly. He did not need to. 14 people in a pavilion. And he simply stood. And the conversation slowed. "I brought you all here because something happened Friday," he said, "and I don't want to sit with it privately. That's not something I'm willing to do." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out the note. He had removed it from the door carefully, smoothed it, and folded it once. Now he unfolded it and held it up and read it aloud. "Real grandkids only. Don't knock." He did not look at his parents when he read it. He looked at the note. Then he looked up at the room. The silence was not a shocked silence, exactly. It was more like the silence of people who are sorting through several responses at once and can't settle on one. He watched Adelia's face change. He watched Theo set down his fork. Lorraine's voice, when it came, was quiet and controlled. "Oren, this isn't the appropriate. I'm not angry," he said. And that was the strange thing. He meant it. He had expected anger and found something colder and more durable. "I need everyone in this family to know what Kale would have seen if I hadn't gotten out of the car first. That's all. I'm not making a speech." He sat back down. Edmund said nothing. He was looking at the center of the table with an expression that was not guilt and not defiance, but something in between. The expression of a man who has been certain about something for a long time and has just been asked to hold it up to light he didn't choose. Then, from the far end of the pavilion, near the corner where the Hartley cousins sat, a woman named Bet set down her deviled egg plate and said, "I need to say something." Everyone looked at her. She was 63, Oren's second cousin on his mother's side, and she had the slightly weathered composure of someone who has lived alone long enough to stop softening her words unnecessarily. "I've known about this family for a long time. she said. Longer than most of you know. The rain said, Bet no. Bet's voice was not unkind. It was simply firm in the way that old certainties sometimes are. Oren deserves to hear this. All of you do. She looked at Oren directly. Your grandfather, Edmund's father, the man your father always described as the foundation of this family, was adopted. At birth. By the Callaways. He had no biological connection to the name any of you carry. The pavilion was very quiet. I found out from my mother 20 years ago. She told me because she thought someone should know. I've kept it because it didn't seem like my business to disrupt anything. She glanced at Edmund. But you put a note on a door for a child, so now it's my business. Oren looked at his father. Edmund's jaw had shifted. He was looking at his cousin, or former cousin, and the expression on his face was something Oren had not seen there before. A kind of exposure, the particular vulnerability of a man whose certainties have just been made uncertain. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Cale's voice came from across the pavilion, cheerful and utterly outside the moment. Dad, can we get more chips? Yeah, Oren said, his voice level. In a minute, Bud. October passed. November arrived with the particular cold of the upper Midwest, frost on windshields, the year turning in on itself. Oren and Margot did not speak much about the gathering in the weeks after. This was not avoidance exactly. It was more like two people who have watched something important shift and are taking quiet inventory. They had grown over the past few years into a kind of parallel intimacy. They loved each other and they moved through the same house. That there were whole territories of interior life they no longer crossed into together. The gathering had disturbed that arrangement, not repaired it, disturbed it, which Oren was starting to understand was sometimes what repair looked like at the beginning. Edmund called in the third week of October. Oren let it ring and then called back the next morning, early. His father's voice was different, not broken, just less constructed. Edmund Callaway had always spoken the way he kept the driveway, maintained, deliberate, nothing out of place. Now there were pauses in places where there hadn't been before. I've been thinking, Edmund said. Oren waited. About what Bet said. I have been too. I don't know if it's true. I'd need to, I suppose I could look into it. A pause. But I've been thinking about what it would mean if it were. Oren didn't fill the silence. He had learned, over a lifetime of being Edmund Callaway's son, that filling his father's silences was how you kept him from actually arriving somewhere. I suppose, Edmund said, that I built something in my head about what this family was, what the name meant. Another pause. And your mother is more frightened of things changing than she lets on. I know that about her. She put the note up. I want you to know I saw it after. I didn't ask her to do it. He stopped. I should have taken it down. I didn't think you were coming until later. That's not really the point, Dad. No, Edmund said. I know it isn't. Oren sat in the early morning kitchen, light coming through the east window, coffee going cold beside him. He thought about the 9-year-old in the back seat. He thought about what it costs a child to understand that certain adults do not consider him real, and how most of that cost isn't paid immediately, but slowly, in the currency of small moments across years. I'd like to see Cale, his father said. I know. Is that? Give me some time, Oren said. Not forever, but some time. Edmund said he understood. Oren believed him. Not completely, not in the way that resolves things, but enough. The rain did not call. Oren had expected this. His mother was a woman who reorganized her own history when it became painful, who would find a way, over the following months, to frame the note as a misunderstanding, a provocation, something that had been taken out of context. He did not hate her for it. He had stopped expecting her to be different a long time ago, which was its own kind of grief, clean and quiet and not particularly useful to look at too often. Margot, one night in November, sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, I've been thinking about what I said on the phone, about protecting the version of things. He looked at her. I do that with us too, she said. I think I've been doing it for a while. He was quiet. I'm not saying it as an accusation. I'm saying it because I've been trying to figure out why, and I think it's because I was scared that if I named things, we'd have to actually deal with them. And now? She looked at the table, then back at him. I think not naming them has been worse. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, not as a resolution, as an acknowledgement. She turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a while in the kitchen that smelled like dinner and cold air, with the sounds of Kale moving around upstairs, and neither of them said anything else that night that felt like it needed to be said. February. The year gone heavy with winter. Aaron drove back to Millhaven on a Sunday afternoon, alone this time. He had told Margot where he was going. She had nodded and said, "Take your time," and he had understood that she meant it literally, that she was not measuring his forgiveness against any timeline, and that what he did now belonged to him in a way that few things in a shared life do. His parents were home. He had not called ahead. He stood at the door, the same 3 steps, and knocked. His mother answered. She looked at him the way people look when they have rehearsed an expression, and then the actual person arrives and the expression doesn't quite fit. She looked older. She was wearing an apron, which meant she had been in the kitchen, and there was a quality in her eyes. Not guilt, not exactly. Something closer to the particular exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a complicated story for a long time. "Oren," she said. "Hi, Mom." She stepped back. He came in. The house smelled the same as it always had. Wood smoke and something baked and the faint mineral smell of the old radiators. Edmund was in the living room, in the armchair by the window, and he stood when Oren came in, which was something his father did not usually do. Oren sat on the sofa. Lorraine came in from the kitchen and sat in the chair across from him. Edmund settled back into his. For a moment, no one said anything. Outside, snow was falling in the light and specific way it does in February. Not storming, just persisting. "I've been thinking about Bet's story," Oren said. "About Grandpa." His parents exchanged a look. "I had some things looked into," Edmund said. "Informally. Birth records, what I could access." Oren waited. "It appears to be true." Lorraine looked at her hands. Edmund's expression had the quality of a man who has made peace with something at a cost he is still calculating. "So the name," Oren said, "the thing you've been protecting all this time, this idea that there's a line, a continuity, a real and an unreal. It was always a story. It was always something someone chose." His father looked at him. "Yes, that's all Kale is," Oren said. "A choice. Same as your grandfather was." No one argued with this. He had not come to argue. He had come to say the thing, simply, in the place where it needed to be said. Lorraine lifted her eyes. She looked for a moment very much like the woman he had grown up watching move through this house. Competent, contained, frightened of the wrong things. "I'd like to see him," she said, "if you'd allow it." Aaron looked at her for a long time. Not unkindly. "That depends on him," he said. "He's 9. He gets to have a say in who his grandmother is." She flinched. Slightly. Absorbed it. "Okay," she said. He stood. He looked around the room, the wood stove, the family photos on the wall, the window with its steady snow. And he felt something in him that was not forgiveness and not coldness, but something more honest than either. A clear-eyed awareness of what this family was, finally seen without the distortion of what he had needed it to be. He put on his coat. "I'll talk to Kale," he said. "I'll tell him that his grandparents would like to know him, that it's his choice. And whatever he says, I'll tell you." Edmund walked him to the door. At the threshold, he put a hand briefly on his son's shoulder, the way men who don't know how to say things sometimes say them, and Oren nodded once and walked to his car. He sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. The snow was quiet on the windshield. He thought about the drive home, about Margot in the kitchen, about Kale with his stick and his pebbles, about a man named Robert Calloway who had been chosen and given a name and built a family that believed itself to be made of something fixed and permanent, when really it had always been made of what? every family is made of a decision, repeated daily by people trying their imperfect best. He started the car and drove home through the snow, and the road was long and the sky was low and the world outside was very quiet, and he found that he was okay with that.